Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. Today, sterling fell against the US dollar to its lowest level since 1985. Greg and Richard discusses why this has happened and asks, does this mean the US dollar is king within a coronavirus environment? Welcome to Richard and Greg. Today is hopefully Wednesday, the 18th of March 2020, and the time is 17:05 GMT. Now, yesterday we provided a coronavirus update. So today we're going to focus more on the financial side, but we will have a brief update from Greg in just a moment. Interestingly, the news headlines that have been published only a few hours ago is that the British pound has plummeted to its lowest level against the US dollar since 1985. That is quite scary. And whereas only a couple of days ago, we mentioned the fact that the dollar to pound was $123 to £1 sterling, and less than 10 days ago, it was $131 to £1 sterling. Today, it's as low as $1.15 to a pound sterling. So without further ado, we shall go over to Greg, get an update, and then we shall start talking about what's happening to the pound, what's happening to gold and silver prices, and where do we go from here. So Greg, are you awake and are you alive?
One from column A and one from column B. I'm told that it beats the alternative.
If it doesn't, let me know.
Indeed, I will, but I hope never to find out.
Okay, so far away, Greg. What's happening?
Well, I went out at about 12 o'clock today, 12 GMT, and it's now 1700 GMT. When I went out, the recorded cases had just broken 200,000. Deaths had just broken 8,000. That's worldwide. That is also recorded. That does not mean to say it's the finite figure, because we know that many countries are failing to record all sorts of detail. However, on the same principle, when I got home half an hour ago, recorded cases had gone up by 8,000. And deaths had gone up by about 300. So we're now on 208,471 cases at 8,312, which is quite a big bump, especially if you were one of them. Italy has not shown its figures so far today, probably because at the rate they're going, they've run out of fingers and toes to count. Britain has increased recorded cases, new cases, by 676 and is now 2,626. And deaths have increased by 33, making it 104 total. I love the column heading, new deaths. It's a bit difficult to have old deaths, isn't it? USA has been considerably worse for new cases, with 1,157 new cases, bringing their total to 7,568, and 117 recorded deaths. So let's call it quits on the figures for today so far.
Of course, we are going to see a dramatic rise in American figures because they're now starting to roll out the testing kits, and therefore we'll have more accurate figures. We mentioned yesterday that there'll be I can't remember the figure you said. Was it about 1.5 million testing kits immediately available? And of course,
1.3.
1.3. And they're now employing private industry to produce more. So as these are actually produced, these figures are just going to keep on rising.
They're not only going to rise they're not going to be wildly accurate for a very long time. How do you test 350, 370 million Americans with 1.3 tests? It's a bit silly, isn't it? And much of the time, there is no point in testing because it's youngsters with no serious risk and or individuals who are completely asymptomatic and wouldn't have presented for a test anyway. So we do have hugely underestimated figures for virtually every country.
Well, moving over to the finance side of things, which we shall discuss here, because I've put out a video this morning, Gold and Silver Markets Update. And we had a scenario this morning where gold was more or less pretty constant in dollar terms, and silver was falling just a little. Silver has fallen quite a bit since, but of course the big move in gold relatively is in sterling. And we've seen, while you and I have been chatting on the phone just 5 minutes or so before this podcast, gold suddenly jumped up £25, which in the overall scheme of things is not enormous, but it's certainly graphically quite an interesting rise. But it's all because of sterling's fall against the US dollar. And by the way, Greg, the US dollar index is now 101.6. And we said from an interview we conducted literally, well, I would say a year or so ago, whereby we actually predicted, or our guest speaker predicted, 100-point dollar index, spot dollar index. And we were quite chastised when we produced that video, because at the time I think it was closer to 93.4, and every man and his dog were stating that the dollar index was going down to 80 because the dollar was on the verge of collapse. And we're finding the complete opposite occurring. Certainly against the basket of currencies, it's rising. Anyway, why is the pound slumping quite so much in your opinion?
Well, for starters, that the prediction made a year ago by the guest speaker was that accurate, it must have been me.
No, it wasn't you.
Now there's a surprise. Why is it dropping? Quite simply, America is clouding its figures heavily. It has a more propaganda-based governance system over a far larger territory with a much bigger population, and it is able to indulge in greater movements of its own currency by printing currency, by issuing currency, by moving currency around between its various banks, the Fed, etc. I'm not sure that it tells you all that much, but it is a very, very good system on which professional gamblers can spin their currency roulette wheels to make money. The sterling value has dropped purely and simply because everybody and his uncle in this country is trying to damage our democracy in that they failed to get elected, and they are spending their time openly attacking the government for using the best advice that is available in this country, drawing the best conclusions in accord with the manner of our democracy. However, again and again and again, they are showing that the opposition is absolutely lost and bewildered, yet that doesn't preclude them for quite literally running off at the mouth in an attempt to seem of some relevance. Just as at the moment we have school teachers who would rather be on yet another fully paid prolonged holiday, when in fact the best thing for the country is to keep school children in school rather than sending school children home and taking the risk that they will be killing their grandparents who would be looking after them because their parents are in the economic structure and need to continue working. Of course, if you have your opposition making every effort to talk down your elected government, and every opportunity is taken for those in opposition, or i.e. those who failed to get elected, to try to make the government look incompetent, we are talking of politicians. All politicians at the end of the day are fair to average incompetent. They are doing the best they can. We elected a government, now let's to take the best advice they could find and to draw up a plan and carry it forward. Now, will everybody else please stand back, shut up, and let them get on with it? Because to have squabbling in our parliament and school teachers suddenly becoming bloody experts is an absolute anathema to the success of our government in the long run.
Well, let me read to you, Greg, what the new governor of the Bank of England has said just a couple hours ago. He said there was no single story for the pound's decline. Let me quote him exactly. Sterling is being shunned for a variety of factors, including heightened demand for the highly liquid greenback and expectations that the new look Bank of England may unveil bolder monetary measures next week, like QE, to ease the economic blow from the coronavirus. The market has priced a more than 33% chance of new Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey cutting interest rates to 0 on March the 26th from 0.25% currently. Now, sorry, it wasn't the Chancellor who said that. It was a chap called Joe Manimbo, foreign exchange analyst at Western Union.
That is the opinion of one man, in other words.
It's the opinion of one man. It makes sense, but I will agree with you now, because all they're predicting at the moment is for us to cut rates to 0 from 0.25%. But we've seen in America that they've cut rates to 0 from 1.5%. So the American greenback, or the American interest rates, have been cut considerably more than what we are likely to do. And yet our currency is declining and declining rapidly.
At least we have some wriggle room left. America hasn't.
No, and the president has announced that he's going to give every family in America $1,000. I was thinking of nipping over and becoming a citizen, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely farcical. Do you think Bezos needs $1,000?
Well, hopefully he'll send it back.
Yes, but it is farcical, isn't it? There are umpteen billionaires in the system, and he's going to give them $1,000 each. However, is he going to give $1,000 to every homeless individual in America? Is he going to give $1,000 to every single individual who lives in one of those ghastly trailer parks that so many people in America live in?
Well, he's been given $1 trillion to spend, so who knows? Who knows, Greg?
They are going to make decisions that mean that they can spend $1,000 and use it to buy votes. I think it stinks.
So coming back to this country, why has sterling collapsed so much? I take on board your point about politicians talking it down, but financial...
The entire media is talking it down. Mm-hmm. Our media is talking it down. It makes news. And organizations like the BBC and Sky and ITV and Channel 4 no longer do news. They do gossip, slebs, and propaganda. The people who are employed on ridiculously high salaries to produce these gossip columns and read them off of auto cues haven't got a good word to say about Britain any day of the week. And yet they are prepared, the BBC, to live without any competition on a tax levy. that is levied on everyone in Britain to fund their ridiculous behaviour. It is nothing more nor less than a scam.
Well, all I can say is the opposition have been doing that for years. Are you sure this isn't a post-Brexit effect, that the Camerons of this world warned the Brexiteers against, Greg?
I'm absolutely certain that it's not a realistic one, just as I'm absolutely certain that the fear-mongering and buying as Chancellor of the Exchequer reports from the Treasury to fulfill a required result is anything but honest. And Osborne commissioned a report from the Treasury that was to show worst case scenario of Brexit. It was then published by organizations underhand and dishonest in the media, and it was presented that this was what could be expected. No, it wasn't. This is what had been written to fulfill the requirements of a scoundrel.
Well, what I can add is a 0.25% cut in interest rates, which is envisaged on the 26th, really does not in any way, shape or form justify the fall in sterling to the level that has happened. Now, I am getting some information, but I am frankly not 100% up to date. But the QE program that was mentioned in the media is going to be far more expansive than many envisage. Now, if that does come about, then maybe the information has started to leak and the markets are reacting accordingly. The dilemma, of course, Greg, and it's a big dilemma in my opinion, if the value of your currency is already going down in advance of you reducing rates, do you still go ahead and reduce them? And if you do, does that make it worse? Or will the markets think, okay, it's not quite as bad as we thought, but going down to zero is pretty awful. And if they go into minus territory, if that does happen, what are you going to do if you've got money in your bank account, Greg? You're going to whip that out pretty darn quickly, aren't you?
Well, what the government would be doing under those circumstances is not going down to a minus figure. It would follow the example of Japan, where they had negative growth. And if that isn't a minus figure, I'd love to know what is.
Right. Well, Greg, thank you very much. So the bottom line, it's all Corbyn's fault, according to you, then?
No, the bottom line is the fundamental dishonesty of the media in cahoots with politicians on all sides, some trying to do their very best and others desperately trying to get into a position of security where their salaries are guaranteed and improved. Do bear in mind, whatever the outcome of this, whether that's in America or in Britain, not one single solitary politician will take a wage cut.
No, that's true. That is true. And they're talking about, I think I read Carphone Warehouse are going to lay off 3,000 people in the United Kingdom.
Effectively, they've gone bust.
Effectively. And those people will end up on the Social Security benefit system, which will be a considerable drop in their income. But yet, as you rightly say, the politicians now, and we're seeing this all around the country, are all phoning in saying they've got a cold, they're not going to go into work in case they spread the coronavirus, and yet their pay, regardless of what happens now, will be totally unaffected.
And on a par with that, you get rogues like Richard Branson, who has been milking the system left, right, and centre for 50 years, having started his entire enterprise buying up obsolete records and claiming back the purchase tax and driving them across the channel, where he practiced his superb French by saying "où est le dump" and taking them to the rubbish tip, having got the purchase tax back on them. Eventually, he was cautioned to the extent that if he did it again, he would face the courts. He then rode on the back of one record, Tubular Bells, to make his name. He then built up a record company out of that, which eventually he sold out, and purely on leverage, because he really didn't have much money at that stage, he semi-franchised his operation and he set up Virgin Airlines, taking en route a massive salary, buying himself pleasant and exquisite properties, and eventually buying himself a luxury island. And yet now that he is facing a little bit of difficulty along with his entire labor force because of the cut back in travel, he is pleading to the government for a 7.5 billion payout to British Airlines. How about putting back some of the extortionate profits that some of the directors and major shareholders in the airline business have been taking for many years? I'm sorry, I don't have much time for these professional gamblers. They produce very little, they produce even less of value, and they are the first be up to their armpits in the honey pot if there is 4 and 9 pence profit to be taken out of it. He is not alone. Look at the billions that are made by people like Soros, gambling against other people's well-being, and so on and so forth. Look at Bezos, who has just settled with his wife in a divorce case where they took half of their money each that they had made out of Amazon, which was $100 billion, and the settlement was 50 billion each. And yet Amazon is an appalling payer when you consider that kind of profit. And I'm not sure that it has even made an honest profit at any stage. But one thing I am certain of is it doesn't make anything. It doesn't provide health to anyone. It doesn't provide well-being to anyone. And it doesn't even pay its labor force anything like as successfully or on any kind of scale of integrity relative to the income of its top directors and shareholders. I don't believe we should be bailing these people out.
Now, on that note, you'll be pleased to hear that I've been told today that Las Vegas is in trouble because people are not going gambling. A number of the casinos in the United Kingdom are not seeing the footfall that they were anticipating. And so at least that form of gambling may disappear. On the other side of things, I'm a little worried you might be becoming a socialist, Greg, and if that happens, God forbid.
Fat chance. However, I have been a socialist all my life. Socialist with a small s. We should all try and help others at all times. That is socialism.
Bernie Sanders will be delighted to speak to you, I have no doubt. Greg, gotta go. Thank you.
My pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles, and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.